We're okay. All right. This is the second in our series. The other series is the aspects in spiritual astrology. And from now until shortly before Christmas, we will ping-pong back and forth between the two series, and then we'll take a short break for Christmas and New Year's, and then we'll go back to it again, and we'll run all the way probably until about June. Maybe even longer if it doesn't look like we're getting everything said. Now, this mystery wisdom in modern thought I'm going to introduce tonight is going to be introductory to the whole idea of what mystery wisdom is and what we're trying to accomplish in all of these talks. This is actually a second series. Last year, we did a series on what are the spiritual worlds and what is an aura and what is the process of dying and being reborn and the process of destiny, how cause and consequence work together. And that was all last year. This year is going to be cosmology in everyday living, and so we'll just get started with that. In fact, we probably won't even use the blackboard tonight. It'll be all invisible. It'll require imagination, and that's about it. This sort of material has been told more in story fashion than it has been told in didactic fashion. And so tonight we're going to introduce the whole material of the course in a story. And that way you can accept it or not accept it and such. The story is a story that some of you have heard before. I know John has heard it before, so I'll try to bring in different sides of it than I have done in different renditions. And, okay. Classically, there was a great storytelling about 2,200 years ago. In the times of Socrates, there were some of the most brilliant minds in the world gathered together in Athens. And they all got together one night and they had a storytelling bout. It was actually more than a storytelling bout. It was a drinking bout. And it's told of in Socrates, in Plato's dialogue called symposium. And that big word, when we hear titles of things like Symposium on Art and the Modern Mind, the word symposium really means drinking bout. And what it was is they just took a topic, and each one tried to eloquently say more about the topic than everyone else did. And the topic that they chose was love. And everybody got pretty drunk, so that the stories kept getting wilder and wilder, except for Socrates. And Socrates had such mind over matter that he was able to drink several quarts of wine in a night and be as sober when he was finished as when he had started. He could go the whole night through, and then the next day carry on just as normal. But a very curious rendition that has found the light in our modern times of the subject matter that I want to talk about as an introductory story came up in that, and I believe it was Euripides, the great playwright, was telling his story of love, and his story of love had all to do with males and females. And his story was that at one time the gods came along with great swords and they cut us all in half. And that this was the separation of the sexes, and that all of us had another half running around, and what we think of as love is really finding our other half, and when we find that other half, we come together and we're whole, and that was his whole conception of love. Now, that's a story that's been around a long, long time. That same version now finds a lot of currency in the world in the doctrine of soulmates. There are people around who will teach you with real nice, smiley faces, and the more difficult the questions you ask them, the more they smile and the less they tell you. And a lot of these folks will tell you, oh yes, you have a soulmate, and if you're rich enough and pretty enough, I'm your soulmate. But the way it usually goes is I can tell you who your soulmate is, but there is a small fee involved, which really isn't so small at that. But then again, if you're looking for your other half and you're doomed to run around the cosmos for all of your future lives until you find your soulmate, $75 might not be a bad price to pay for finding your other half. You know, there's people that spend that much on a restaurant. I don't know. But the story I want to talk about has to do with the separation of the sexes, which is a story that has been told in many ways. It's told in the Bible and in the Kabbalah, from which the Bible came. And it's told in another version, in a version that's much more to my liking. It's told in some of the Gnostic texts, and it's told in some of the Masonic myths. And I tend to like the Masonic myths and the Gnostic myths much better because I happen to be, in spirit, much more attuned to them. The whole idea is, and you'll be surprised at how much of the course, which is going to come out later on, comes out in the story, but I won't emphasize anything right now. But the whole idea is that human beings are miniatures of the entire cosmos. The way the Bible says, we were created in the image of the divine. And since God is a spirit, the Bible tells us quite clearly, we must be spiritual beings. In spiritual philosophy, that miniature is called a microcosm. That is to say, what goes on within us parallels that which goes on in the greater cosmos. And as the cosmos we change. As the cosmos changes, we change. And we, to some extent, are creative agents in the change. We are actually creators of the universe. Right now, we're very small in the part that we play in that, but eventually we will be big players in terms of the creation. But at this time, according to the legend, the solar system had always been much rarer. In fact, the rarest that it was as rare as what we consider our magnetic fields to be right now, such that we could walk through each other. But cosmos is God's meditation or God's concentration. And there's something about this material in all of its limitation that is the final test of the truth of a meditation. There's something that things are realized in the ignorance and the illusion of matter. So at this time, the cosmos and the beings in it were condensing and they were solidifying. This period in time is called, in esoteric parlance, it's called Lemuria. Now, we're not talking about Lemuria as a place, but we're talking about Lemuria as a period of time. So, as the cosmos, the solar cosmos, was condensing, this made for specialization, and it made for particularization and isolation. And this is the time when the planets were formed within the solar system. And out of this fiery, gassy, etheric nebula were at various places where the whole thing was whirling. At various distances from the center, there were whirlpools. And in these whirlpools, things began to condense, very much like if you ever watch a stream where it goes past rocks, and there are whirlpools. If you throw in chaff or pieces of bark or something like that, they'll catch in a whirlpool and they'll form a little ball. And something like that was happening within the cosmos. And one of these little balls was our planet Earth, and we with it. We were much different then. We were whole beings. We had just finished recapitulating a plant-like kind of consciousness. That doesn't mean to say we were plants as we think of plants now. And we were beginning to come through an animal-like consciousness to come back to our human-like consciousness, or the human consciousness that is ours now. Now, this is an outlook that is evolutionary, but it's not evolutionary in the sense like of Darwin and things like that, because it's an evolution. Darwin's evolution begins with a fortuitous event, a random chance event touches it all off, and in Darwin's evolution, it's just a matter of forces working together, and sometimes they're successful and sometimes they're not, and the ones that are successful last, and that's the way evolution takes place. In the spiritual outlook of evolution, it's a matter of there is a divine intelligence within the intelligence of God that takes part in this great creative work, and the things that have not yet awakened, the creatures, are brought to waking consciousness by the spiritual hierarchies. So we were condensing in the earth. In fact, if we look in the Bible, this period is spoken of as the period of Adam. And ADM means humanity of red earth, because the earth was still red hot. So in our story then, the earth is a fiery ball. And in this fiery ball, things are separating. And there are different layers. Just very much like what happens in a blast furnace or in a pot where you melt lead or where you melt the metal, like the slag rises to the top. And the slag really is what our continents are right now. In fact, the flux that caused the continents to rise to the top was none other than quartz or silicon dioxide. Because of its structure, it formed a real nice smooth stuff so that it could slide past the heavy metals and the iron and nickel in the center, and past the copper and gold and things, and then the silicon magnesium, and on the top the continents were floating. But the continents were still molten yet. And so we began condensing and solidifying at the same time that the continents were solidifying. But our nature was different than it is now. Physically, our nature was that we were neither male nor female. We were both at the same time. And because of that, we had our total creativity inward. And with this total inward creativity, we were what would now be called natural magicians. We had a creative power in us. However, we needed to be able to continue onward in evolution. And to continue onward in evolution, we had to divide our energies, because this stuff produces some real problems. And one of the problems was, how do we become individuals and yet at the same time build and perpetuate bodies in the physical stuff where we know the bodies must break down, because the law of this physical world is imperfection. We learn perfection in a realm of imperfection. So one of the problems was how to build bodies and how to build organs of intelligence so that we could wake up in these bodies. And so what was done is, according to the story, one side, which is more or less like one pole of our energy, was turned outward. And the other side was turned inward. And some of the specialization in the outward turning resulted in male bodies, and some resulted in female bodies, according to the way the focus was done. Now, mind you, we're talking about something that's taking thousands of years. Thousands of years. Now, this is not to say that everyone has always been a male or everyone has always been a female. According to the mysteries, you cannot have any of these prejudices. There are male bodies and there are female bodies, and sometimes you're born in one to learn the lessons that way, and sometimes you're born in another to learn the lessons that way. You can't be a racist and be a spiritual student, because you know you've probably been in all the different races, and if you haven't been, you're likely to be. And if you're a racist, you're most likely to be in such a position where your racism will be burned out of you. So in effect, it wasn't a matter of being cut in half by knives, but our consciousness was directed, some outward for procreation, and some inward to build internal organs, especially organs of the nervous system, so that we could bring an indwelling intelligence. Now that's what our physical activity was. This still stays with us yet. When we were male-female, we were large bag-like creatures. And we were very much like a cell. And when the cell was divided, the nucleus was divided, and the plasma was divided. I'm sure you've all seen movies of cell division. Such that the nucleus divides first, and then the plasma divides. In the case of the human beings, we were tied together something like this. We were folded up. And the nucleus was what is called the Adam's apple, and the area at the base of the spine around the genitals. So all of the creative activity that eventually was to be associated with the power of the creative word and the mind, and the creative activity that is associated with procreation was set at two different centers. And so that's the way the nucleus divided. Where our hands and feet were, in our etheric body, there was a break in the circumfluent etheric body, so that we have, to this day, the places where Christ was crucified on the cross were in the feet and in the hands. And I'm sure you all know about laying on of hands and magnetic healings and things like that, where you can direct those etheric energies and put them to good, solid use. So then the sexes were beginning to be separated. But then something curious happened. The human beings were most guided by beings that in our Western understanding are called angels. There are different names in different cultures, and from time to time we may mention some of them, but the names aren't as important as the beings themselves and as the ideas that are involved. But the angels who were guiding us were not alone. At one time, in a far distant period when the cosmos was altogether different, when the angels were human-like, some of them, I'll try to hint at it a little bit again from the Bible, because that's what most people know. In the Bible, it says, in the beginning there was the heavens and the earth. And they talk about the first period being void and without form. And in the second period, there was light. And in the third period, the waters were divided from the waters. And that third period is, we're going to go more into detail in this in future talks. In that third period is when what are now the angels were human-like. And then we were animal-like. We're talking about something that goes back billions of years. And in this period, which was sometimes called a moon period or an old moon period, the solar system was thinner than our magnetic fields are as far as the density of the stuff. But nonetheless, there was a definite core, and that core was hot. And there was a pre-water kind of condition, like a fire mist, that was heated and cooled and heated and cooled. And in the same way we get our experiences by the changing of the seasons, and hot and cold and dry and wet and all the different experiences we get. In that time, the cosmos, the beings were learning their lessons through the different places where the etheric water or the etheric fluid was warmer or cooler. And some of the angels, or what are now the angels at that time, became specialists. They liked it hot. Some like it hot. And they didn't want to circulate. And every being, this is a cardinal principle throughout all creation, every being has freedom. We don't even enter into creation without freely doing so. And these beings sought to assert their freedom by saying no, they would not rotate throughout the entire cosmos. And what they would do instead is that they would develop only near the heat. These happen to be the brightest of the angels, at least according to Milton, who was a seer, and some Gnostics and some Kabbalists. They were the brightest of all of the angels. But they didn't develop, because of their recalcitrance, because of their stubbornness, they didn't develop a receptivity. And because they hadn't developed the receptivity, they didn't evolve as the rest of the angels. And so they didn't unfold all of the spiritual ability that they, I hate to use the word should have, but that would have put them in perfect harmony with the cosmic plan. These beings were called Lucifers. Or Lucifer Spirits. And so they more or less fell behind the angels in terms of evolution. And then they found themselves in our period now, in the story that we're talking about. Now we're back in the earth again, and the earth is condensing. And as the earth condenses, the human beings are beginning to condense with it, and they're beginning to separate into outer beings and inner beings, though most of the consciousness is inner. And we see things inwardly. We saw things inwardly in the Lemurian epoch, that period of time. And as we were then unfolding, these Lucifer spirits saw a great chance, because they saw at this time is when human beings were going to become completely self-conscious. And they would be on their own. And they would be on their own in this external material world. And they thought, well, we can't learn the same way the angels did because we didn't unfold that faculty of receptivity, of wisdom, without resistance. And there was too much resistance. And they said, we have to have experience some way. They couldn't be destroyed because they were a creative part of the divine. And if they were to destroy, they were to destroy themselves. And or they would have to tire themselves out. And so, as a consequence, they said, if we make the human beings, if we can get them to experience things the way we want them to, we can sort of draw energy off of them, and we can draw intelligence off of them. And therefore they decided that if they got in on the ground floor of humanity on the earth and made human beings like themselves, then there would be a sympathy And with that sympathy, they would be able to draw energy off of us. And so what they did, they precipitated what is sometimes called the fall of humanity. And the fall of humanity was they appeared to us. Now, the way they appeared to us is because our consciousness was mostly inward. It's very much like it is now, only it was much more distinct then. The way it is right now, we have one stream of consciousness going inward. We perceive things, and we have millions of experiences through our eyes and ears that we draw in, and we draw all the way back into our self-consciousness so that we know what that experience means. That's one current. The other current is if we turn inward to the very heart of our being, and in the heart of our being we draw on a divine creativity, and from that divine creativity we pour outward our thoughts and our feelings and our creative actions. In these times, back in Lemuria, according to the story, it went that those that were in female bodies were very much different than those that were in male bodies. If we talk about receptive females now and macho males now, it's nothing compared to what it was like in Lemuria. Because, mind you, we had no knowledge or very little knowledge of the external world. We were almost insensate, like a stone. You could kick us and we almost wouldn't know that there was something external. And so, what it was with those in male bodies, or when people were in male bodies, they were brought through all sorts of experiences that produced an awareness of externality. Anything that produced a sensation, and the first sensation usually was pain. This is why to this day yet Lemuria is associated with cancer, and this astrological sign cancer, and cancer is still associated with masochism. And that's why to this day yet there's something in the focus of the cancer consciousness that people associate pain with goodness. And so that anything that waked up external experience was considered good. Just in the same way now, anything that causes us to be more loving to other people, we consider good. But back in Lemurian times, when we were experiencing something external, that was considered good. But when we were in female bodies, then we turned inward. And we could see things inwardly. And so when the Lucifer spirits communicated with human beings, they communicated with them by interpenetrating the auras. And in the area of what is now the spine, the Lucifer consciousness appeared in there, and it appeared, so this is why it's associated with the serpent, because the spine was like a serpent or like a snake. And in our inner consciousness, the Lucifers insinuated to us the fact of which we were gradually becoming aware. That is, we were becoming aware of selfhood. But we were also becoming aware of the external world, and we were also becoming aware of limitations in both physical and to some extent psychological consciousness. And the Lucifer said, if you listen to us, we will teach you how to be immortal, how you can build for yourself new vehicles of life, new bodies whenever you want to, and you'll be like the gods. And mind you, when people were becoming self-conscious and were beginning to become aware that there were bodies that died, this sounded pretty good. But there was a catch in it. Originally, it was intended that we were to gain the external perception, but at the same time we wouldn't lose that internal clairvoyance that we had at that time. But under the guidance of the Lucifers, they taught us, see, we were supposed to have experience and the meaning of experience at the same time, such that when we feel something outwardly, or when we see something outwardly, or when we hear something outwardly, inwardly we would intuitively and clairvoyantly know the meaning of it. And there would have been a harmonious progression. It wouldn't be the way it is now. Now we got to learn the same old mistakes again and again and again, and then finally something sinks in, but then there are 2 or 3 more replications just to make sure that we know it. But that was the intended way, that we wouldn't make so many mistakes. But what the Lucifers, because they love that hot, fiery experience, what they taught was, we will give you creative experience. And almost like advertising people, who I believe are ruled by the Lucifer Spirits, whether they know it or not, and they're ruled by the Lucifer Spirits with malicious intent to keep us ignorant. Why else would they advertise with so much sex, right? Because they want to keep us focused on the sexuality. As long as we're focused on sexuality, we turn that creative fire down into sensation, blind sensation, and we don't turn it up into creative consciousness and into developing love. And so that's precisely what the Lucifers insinuated. They said, we'll teach you how to unite and create new bodies, and when you have that power, you will be immortal. What they didn't tell us was that there were harmonious times that we could come together and produce new bodies without pain and suffering. We didn't know self-consciously about all of the laws of nature, all of the harmonies in the cosmos. And so they sold us a bill on experience, and we went for it. And as a consequence, over thousands and thousands of years, we turned the energy, we became rebellious. And we chose experience over harmonious experience and insight. And as a consequence, we put ourselves more deeply into the realms of experience, which in turn hardened the world of experience itself more than was intended. And so now we find ourselves in the muck that we are in. We find ourselves in a dark and hardened condition in a world that we can even believe that there is no God, or that there is no meaning to things. One can exist quite successfully with such an outlook in the world right now, as we see the world right now. So the whole thing has taken various turns and twists along the way. This was precisely what the Lucifers wanted. They wanted us to be taken away from the divine hierarchs, because then they could guide us in such a way that they could get all of the experience so that they could continue on with their evolution, and they could harvest us freely. Now this isn't all bad, because it provides a very... Yeah. Was it ringing off of the board? Okay. It provides for us a very unique condition. Previously, if we had never taken the fall that we took, we would have more or less coasted through evolution in such a way that we would have had the experiences and have known the meanings, and we would have come out and we would have been very beautiful beings. We would have been innocent. But as a consequence, see, the option is always available for us to go against the plan. However, the plan is so airtight that even going against it works with it, except that it's just more painful because you're out of step with the whole of the cosmos. And so all of the pain and suffering that we have now is a result of fighting against the grain. But we have a taste of freedom that we never would have had elsewise. That is by saying, I will freely, we didn't even know what we were doing, but in effect we said to ourselves, I will freely do something in ignorance, and I will freely go against the truth. And in so doing, I will learn why the truth is the truth, which I can only really learn by stepping outside or trying to step outside of it. And that was the wonderful thing that we gained from the Lucifers. But on the other hand, it means that it's a much harder road, and it's a much more painful road that we have to travel. And a good number of us won't make it because of that, because we'll be too much let off in the side. Doesn't mean we're going to be destroyed or anything like that. It means just that we won't be able to make it in the allotted time. We may have to wait for another cosmos, a few billion years here and there. You know, what's a few billion years among friends? I don't want to joke about it because it's a very, very serious subject. But I want to get back to the separation of the sexes. Now, usually more than one thing is accomplished at one time. It's only scientists in the laboratories that try to separate things down so that they have only one cause and one consequence. The reality of the world is that any given moment in history has many forces impinging on it, and there are many consequences that come out of it. And that, in a way, it helps develop a simple objectivity between cause and consequence to work with very controlled things as science does, but it doesn't give you a realistic view. It gives a simple, limited objectivity, which is a good place to begin with. But eventually you have to get to the point where you look at things in wholes, where you see everything that's involved in it from all of the points of view at the same time, which is, again, the outlook of spiritual seership. See, the Lucifers would have us make machines and divide things smaller and smaller and put more power behind the machines and things like that, because they like that limited consciousness. Because as long as they can keep us putting all of our energy into machines and greater power and very limited cause and consequence, we can't see the bigger picture. Because if we saw the bigger picture, we would have a more whole consciousness, and then we would develop something that was more harmonious with the purpose of things, and then we would be out of their grasp. So like, there are big decisions like nuclear power plants and things like that. Things are more insidious than just the radiation. What's behind it is a whole outlook of wanting to work with processes of destruction rather than with an integral life that stays whole and follows through on things. I'm trying to hint at a whole bunch of things. I get greedy when I give a talk like this, and I want to do more and more and more. So when the sexes were separated, more things than one were accomplished. We were divided in another way. We were divided in our true inner spiritual nature. We've talked about the division of the bodies, so that some of the bodies were more male and some were more female. But in the consciousness, there was also a division, and that division was permanent. That is, there are some of us who were divided with one polarity and some of us who were divided with another polarity. Those of us who were most amenable to the forces of the Lucifers are called children of fire. And those who were more amenable to the influences of the angels were called children of water. So we have the firelings and the waterlings. Now, in the biblical story, let's fuse a few stories together here. The Bible and some of the Gnostic. In the Bible story, Eve had 3 children. Abel, Lucifer Samael, which in some of the Gnostic texts is just described as some demon, united with Eve. That is, with those of us when we were in feminine bodies, we united our consciousness with the Lucifer spirits, and the consequence of that union was Cain. And this is where the Canaanites come from in the Bible. They had a special mark, the mark of Cain. After Abel passed on, Adam knew Eve. Now this is a very curious thing. If you look in the Old Testament, deep in the Old Testament, every time there is a sexual union, it says so-and-so knew so-and-so. That's because very deep back in history, our consciousness was so inward, we weren't aware of the external world. We could see the soul nature of each other, very much the way a dog can, if somebody new comes to your house, the dog can tell you whether it's friend or foe way before you know whether it's friend or foe, because the dog is looking with an inner eye and it sees the soul qualities. And we all had that internal vision yet. Even when we were in male bodies, we still had that internal vision. And with that internal vision, we knew each other with the eye of the soul, but we didn't know each other physically. And the only time that we knew each other physically was in the extremity of the sexual act. Now it's just the opposite. Now we see each other physically, but we don't really know each other soul for soul, except for some people, sometimes in the moment of sexual union, they feel the total of the other person and they see them like with the eye of the soul, which is not the way we're going either, because we should be developing the clairvoyance within ourselves by an internal marriage, but that's all another topic. And so times are opposite now from the way they were then. But Adam knew Eve and Seth was born. So we have 3 children of Eve. First we have Abel, that was conceived in such total ignorance and innocence that parentage was unknown. We have Cain, who is the son of Eve and the Lucifer, and we have Seth, who is the son of Adam and Eve. This represents the pure of humanity who never fell. They were so innocent they never fell, and they never needed to come down into this type of existence and this type of consciousness that we have. So Seth then represents, sometimes Seth is called the son of man. I'm going to use this because this is the word that is commonly used in the Bible and not because I'm trying to say anything sexist. But this is the son of man. And Cain is the son of the widow, which has to do with that myth of somebody being born when the father isn't there. All of the heroes are born under the myth of the son of a widow. If you look at Heracles or Perseus or, I don't want to go into them all. In fact, this is a myth that's very much being lived out these days in our times right now. Very special. There are many more heroes being born right now because of broken families. Most young boys are being raised by their mothers, and this makes them become heroes. Also tends to make them more gentle children than ruffians, and they're all being raised as children of widows. So then there is a characteristic. Now this is altogether different. The internal division between the children of fire and the children of water is altogether different than the division of the sexes. Because the division of the sexes, it's just a body. Sometimes you experience through one kind of body, sometimes you experience through the other kind of body. And between the two kinds of experiences, each of which has its own bias, you get somewhat of a full picture. But the division into the children of fire and the children of water is permanent. This is something that is right in our being. In fact, our self-consciousness, if we are children of fire, was more awakened by the influence of the Lucifers than by that of the angels. And our self-consciousness, if we are children of water, is more angel-influenced. Now, there are two distinctly different types of people. The children of fire are people who have to know. They have to create, they have to do, they have to be independent, and they have to be free. So as a consequence, if we look at the lineage of Cain in the Bible, we find Tubal-Cain, Jubal-Cain, Jubilee, Jubilah, the inventors of agriculture and mining, and all of the crafts and all of the arts were developed by the children of Cain. And the children of Cain then, with all of their independence, their weakness is that they're extremely proud and they're extremely independent. And there's a difference between independence and freedom. Freedom, you can still work together with other people, but independence, you set yourself aside. And it really is a fiery nature. And roughly speaking, the children of fire are called, now I don't want to associate this with the organization, though the organization is somewhat associated with the idea. They're called Freemasons. Whereas the children of water they're very receptive. They're accepting. They appeal to authority. They follow the chain of command. They do things more by feeling and by devotion rather than by knowledge. If you look in the Bible, you'll find some adherents of the teachings of Christ. Some say it's by faith and faith alone, and some say it's by works and works alone. And then some, the true Christians, say that it is both by faith and works, where there is the union. In fact, if you look at Christian groups even in our times, you'll find that there are a large number of them that say it's only by faith. You do nothing. Christ does it all. You'll find that those are children of water. And they are, again, not associated with the modern associations we have with it, but they are called Catholics. They approach everything by feeling. Now, there are peculiar things that come out because we lagged by falling deeply into matter. The lagging automatically gives us the opportunity to excel and to go beyond the normal course of evolution. And so if we make an extreme effort in our faith and in our works, we can not only catch up to the way we've fallen behind in evolution, we can move forward. If we do that by an extreme act of faith, by an extremely unctuous surrender to the divine, and we start moving forward in our spiritual evolution, such a one on the children of water side is called a mystic. And the mystics usually have for their ideal something feminine. Either the Virgin Mary or Isis or the Deva Matri, something of that nature. Now, for the children of fire, the Canaanites, after Lemuria came a period called Atlantis. And we became more and more self-conscious and more externalized in Atlantis. Later on in this course, we're going to go into great detail about Atlanta and Lemuria and all of the different periods and things like that. In fact, it might even be too tedious for most people. I'll have to find ways to make it more down to earth rather than so stuffy and intellectual. But as we came into the world, for these people, schools were in order. Because the conscious prevail of information and the knowing, because this is by knowledge and by works and by talents is the way things were accomplished. Like, for example, like in Atlantis, we didn't have to have schools to teach people to be clairvoyant because everybody was clairvoyant. And if you had set up a school to teach clairvoyance, you'd have an empty school. And somebody would say, why would I want to do that? Because I already know that. They didn't know anything about the world. And, for example, when the Atlanteans were coming out of the basins of the earth to inhabit the Promised Land, which is the world that we know it now, the schools taught them the laws of the material world. With their inner vision, they could see the truths of nature. They could see the truths of nature with an inner vision, but they didn't have an external experience of them. And so they were taught to become aware of the external world by building things in the external world around or out of the inner laws of nature that they saw. And so one of the first experiments of creative building where the inner laws of nature were externalized outwardly in building was the Great Pyramid Cheops at Giza, which has all of the laws of nature built in it. The laws of musical harmonics, physical laws, all of the proportions of the planets and movements of the earth in the solar system are all built in with amazing precision. If we take our modern world with all of our computers and all of the things we can do now in the modern world, none of them awe my consciousness as much as the Great Pyramid in Egypt. It is, not only was the external building so perfect, like the way we grind lenses for eyeglasses with that very precision accuracy, the base on which the Great Pyramid is built was built to that levelness. The stone in which it was built was smoothed off to the consistency and the accuracy of eyeglass lenses. And this is on the, we're talking about several city blocks, and it was done with that great of perfection. But that's nothing compared to the things that are built into it. And so these schools first initiated us into the external world, and now that we need to know about the internal worlds, now we have schools, and the students of these schools who by works and by knowledge and by creation advance themselves and humanity spiritually are called occultists, meaning students of hidden things. We're almost done. These schools are called mystery schools. And the people who are behind them are called hierophants. They're called spiritual teachers. Like the building of the temple. Solomon was a mystic. And because of his purity and his loving qualities, he was allowed to build the temple. But he couldn't build it. But Hiram built the temple, and Hiram was the Freemason. He was the builder. He was the son of fire. And so there's a rivalry between the children of fire and the children of water, but they also bring the best out of each other, and they are to be fused. Supposedly, the original Cain was reborn as Hiram and as Lazarus and as John the Beloved. But those are things that we should go into at another time. Whereas the figure here as an ideal is always feminine. The figure here as an ideal is always masculine. It is like the master builder, or it is like the master militarist, or whatever. It's an extremely masculine outlook. It's an extremely fiery outlook. Right now, the attempt in evolution is to fuse these two again into a male-female type of consciousness, and that is in the Aquarian age. So the schools, which were called Hermetic schools, or which were called mystery schools, were schools to teach people the unknown things so that they could progress in their evolution, and in that progress could progress everyone else. Because child of fire or child of water, the service of humanity and the helping, because we're all in this all together, is the only way that we can really evolve. We can't put ourselves ahead and leave everybody else behind. In fact, that's, from a spiritual point of view, that's an absolutely absurd contradiction, because we all go together. You know what I mean? We all pull as one. And so mystery wisdom is what is taught in mystery schools. And these series of lectures, last year it was on cosmography. Like, what is, these are the basic questions. What is humanity and the cosmos made up of? How is it made up? And so last year we looked into auras, and we looked into our mental bodies and into our etheric bodies and such like that. And we saw how we functioned in them through successive lives in birth and rebirth. This time we're going to look at the mystery wisdom, ancient and modern, East and West, but mostly modern Western. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at not what are we, but how did we get here, and where are we going? And the big question that is always in all mystery consciousness, you might say it is there are two big words that the children of fire respond to a lot. And the first one is why. We have to know why things are as they are. And then we have to experience it. We have to try. And so what we're going to do then is look at not what we are, but we'll mention that all over again, but how we came to be what we are, and what is the method for things continuing on, and where does it go. In all of this, there is a realization. There's no reason to meditate if we don't think there are answers to questions. All we do when we ask a question, or when we put something before our consciousness in a meditation, all we're doing really is making a form. Very much like we make a form for pouring molten steel. And then we pour the steel into it, and then we have the object. So when we're meditating or concentrating, we're asking a question. And according to the form of that question, it gets filled with truth. And if the mold is a good mold, we have a good object. So what we're going to do is we're going to look in story fashion at the creation of the cosmos and understand why everything has happened that has happened. Obviously, that's a very big order, and there are a lot of things that I can't answer myself, but I will do as much as I can into trying to plumb the recondite reasons behind things. And what the way the tri-part comes in is we're going to look if we are indeed microcosms, in the same way that an atom has roughly the shape of a solar system, and the solar system has roughly the shape of a galaxy. In that's an idea of macrocosm and microcosm and microcosm. In the same way, we are microcosms of the divine. And therefore, the tri-part is when we find out what goes into the creation of the universe, we know that exists in us. And then whatever we're trying to do, if we're trying to start an organization, or if we're trying to write a poem or do some creative act, the same creative formulae that are in the cosmos are naturally in us, and that if we try, that we can take those formulae and very simply do the same thing that the cosmos does when we're doing our creative work in daily life. And that's going to be the intent of this course. When we meet the next time, 2 weeks from tonight, it'll be a very, very deep talk. It'll go deeper than I can go with my comprehension. But we're going to talk about the nature of the Supreme Being, which is as deep as you can get in terms of knowing anything at all. And that's it for tonight. Are there any questions?
Do you feel that the Luciferians are involved also?
Yes. Yes. I think they are in spite of themselves. Because it's one of those things, one of the few sonnets by Shakespeare that I really like. I don't know if I can remember it. What potions have I drunk from sirens? Oh, from sirens' tears, distilled from limbic's foul as hell within, applying fears to hopes and hopes to fears, still losing where I saw myself to win. How have my eyes from their spears been fitted in the fever of this madding, I can't remember, but it's the whole idea. It's someone who is torn apart by having tried to do something, and what blessed errors hath my heart committed, whilst it thought itself so blessed never. How have my eyes from their spears been fitted by this maddening fever? And so I return, rebuked to my content, learning that from ill I gained thrice more than I spent. I forget but the whole idea is that somebody who's just torn apart from thinking they had done something really good, but found out it was really a bad motivation. But when it all comes out in the wash, we gain much more than we ever intended, even in the positive and the malicious put together. And I think that the Lucifers are indeed to be reassimilated and redeemed back into the whole of things, like some students of mystery wisdom, like Rudolf Steiner, for example, believes that we will be an agency that helps to reassimilate them back into the evolution, which is quite an irony, but that's the way things always work. Another way of saying the perfect workings of destiny is the irony of poetic justice. Here they set out to set us back for their own good, and by interacting with us and trying to set us back for their good, they get uplifted by us helping them along in a way that they never would have accepted in the first place. Yes, I think there are very few beings. I think there are some beings already that have not fitted themselves to go forward with evolution. That's a big subject, and we're going to come to that somewhere along the way, because it's a very touchy subject. I'll give you a shocking example of it. It's the way competition works. We're only competitive with something that is really close to us. There are people, for example, that see nothing wrong with somebody kissing an animal. But for that same person to kiss a black, they would be revolted by that. Because there is a competitive closeness in the association with other human beings where we figure there's safety. Anybody can kiss an animal. It's only just an animal. Whereas in the competitiveness of racism, we're just not sure. That's why, for example, the psychology of it works out that we always try to mortify people, but we can't mortify them completely. So we exaggerate part of them. Like usually we say that they're not distinguished. We say they all look alike. Chinese think all Americans look alike. And then the other thing we do is we try to mortify them, but we still have to exaggerate in that. And the idea, blacks believe that whites have larger genitals. And those sorts of things. You can't completely put somebody down because there's a suspicion that they may be better at some things and may be better in some ways than you are. And so there's that closeness. So it's to talk about people not making an evolution, the people that we're most insecure about because we haven't unfolded that part of ourselves, those are the people we are most likely to project and say they're not going to make it. But for the most part, everyone that we see as a human being is going to make it in evolution. And it's reasonable to think that even most Lucifer spirits will make it. Yes?
You said that the division that took place that separated the children of fire from the children of water was a permanent division. I don't know if I understood what you were saying there. Were you saying that we basically, as humanity, broke off into two paths?
That are
in every incarnation,
yes.
always on the same.
Yes. Our image of self and our image of ego, spiritual self and personal self, is different if we took more to the teaching of the Lucifers than if we took to the teaching of the angels. In fact, it is one of those things. The differentiation was much greater than just children of fire and water, because when you have two, you have many. And the differentiation was actually into 7 rays, because once you have differentiated light from darkness, then light is capable of being broken up into a spectral 7. So there are 7 rays of people. And so there are 7 rays among the children of fire and a parallel 7 rays among the children of water. And those, one always belongs to that ray that they were differentiated under back in those times throughout all the lives. But especially, one is always a child of fire, or always a children of water, a Canaanite or a Sephite. And it is such a thing that if you look at the aura of a child of fire versus a child of water, there is the child of water supposedly, even in the most highly evolved of fire and water, the water child has much more of a pure white in the aura, whereas a fireling has a tint of rose to it. And that's something that carries throughout all incarnations. Incidentally, a lot of what I'm going to say in the Course is hearsay. But all of mystery wisdom is based on science. But there is an analogy to modern science. In modern science, a scientist can say, well, we do this experiment, and anybody else can repeat the experiment. And sure, all you have to do is go 30 years to get a PhD and get yourself into the system where you study this specialized little discipline. And all you have to do is get about $120 million from the government, and you can repeat the experiment, and you can put it in that language so nobody else can understand it either. The same thing is with spiritual science. All of us, it's clear to me, it can be no other way, that I am a fire child. Otherwise, I wouldn't be talking about mystery wisdom. I would be a devotional, quiet person set aside, and I would speak spiritual niceties and pieties and things like that. I don't mean to put down the waterlings, but I have to come from my point of view. And the alchemists were obviously children of fire, and all of the alchemists do the great experiment. And anything that is said in any of these courses, you have to be able to prove to yourself. But the proving of the experiment is not just something that takes place in a laboratory, and when you walk out of the laboratory, you can, smoke and drink and carouse and do whatever you want. The great experiment, if you're an alchemist, takes place within yourself. At one point, you do what is called hermetic sealing. And when you come to that point in the great experiment, you draw only on the truth that comes from within yourself. You listen only to your inner muse. That is the bride of the alchemical marriage. And it is an experiment, and when you have completed the experiment, you can share the results with other experimenters, and you should come up with exactly the same results as they come up with. And the information, this is going to be information taken from various mystery schools that I offer in the classes. Plus, it's going to be with my own, as I see it from my own experience and from my own meditations and such like that. It still has to be proven. And obviously, because I fall on my face every day, it's certainly not flawless material. Okay.
Then just to follow up, if we are indeed on one or another, we're children of one or another of these two paths, so that does not contradict the idea that we can merge the heart and
No,
development.
that's what's most necessary.
Where we're coming from and the path that we will continue to develop with, but we can nevertheless develop with.
Yeah, in our society, I think Jesus people are people that are waterlings, because they always say it's only by faith that it is done. And I believe that in our times, our duty, our times and the times coming, is that's what's going to happen is that the waterlings, by the purity of their faith, are going to unfold a seership. But not having developed the disciplines and the rigors of science and educational theories and such like that, they're going to need training. And I believe that the firelings are going to be the teachers and the educators, because that is perfectly in line with the characteristics of the firelings. However, the firelings must, in that process and before that process, learn humility, because there's no other way that they can communicate and help teach the gentler spirits of the water without developing some kind of humility. At this point, I think in many ways the children of water, by their purity of their faith, have a little bit of the edge if there is a competition in it, because they're more willing to accept their flawed natures and things like that, and because of that, there's a cleansing that takes place. Yes.
Children, particularly with fire and water, does one need the process of the other?
Eventually, yes.
But now, through evolution, they do.
Through evolution, we specialized more, and we carried off on our own things. Like, for example, I'm a perfect example of a fireling. I don't listen to people sometimes. I get carried away in my own notions, and then I just take off and go. I can't even hear people that they're even there, because I'm off and running in my fiery qualities. On the other hand, the children of water, being so receptive, sometimes associated with that receptivity is an anxiousness or a fear. And as a consequence, this kind of outlook to a child of water, it would look like that stuff's of the devil. You hear it all the time. They're suspicious of it. And as a consequence, there is more of a shrinking type of a quality and a pulling away from things, a fearful quality. Whereas here, there's too much of a daring, like walking into volcanoes and things like that. And eventually, they do need each other, because they both are extremes And they are both extremes that were developed by carrying one principle too far in that kind of division. In the same way that there was one extreme of being too far in the earth because we wanted too much to be immortal creative beings, we produced that disparity that pulled us apart so that our experience was outward and our inward experience was lost or gone for a while, and we became almost like living atheists. Yes?
Then does it mean during the Aquarian age, when it comes together, that there are no longer going to be the two strands?
The two strands will continue permanently as long as human beings are human beings separated into the various divisions. I think eventually there are times very, very far in the distant future where we emerge where even individuality is inconsequential or even indefinable without being part of the whole. In the Aquarian age is the beginning of the fusion between the masculine and feminine. Very early in the proceeding into matter, the feminine bodies dominated. And then those in masculine bodies dominated. And now in the Aquarian age will be a neutralizing period. And then after that will be a period again that there will be domination through feminine bodies. And then after that it will be inconsequential because bodies will be made a different way. They'll be made totally by the voice, by the word, and in such a case, all of the divisions that we're talking about now become nonsensical. Yes.
Are there any people today who are the descendants of Abel?
Yes, but they're very rare. They're extremely rare. Supposedly, the being that was known as we got time for a little side trip? We're born under different myths. And in living out that myth, we bring in different historical experiences. So the inner meaning is mythical, and the outer experience is historical. And when the two are put together with waking self-consciousness, you have meaning and history, which gives you a total comprehension. Because the children of Abel never fell, they don't have what we call sin. And sin merely means add harmony. If you walk out here into the weed patch, this is what my backyard looks like, even the weeds look harmonious. You look, every place is beautiful. It's got its own little magic. But then you look where human beings are, and what we've done with the environment, and everything we've done stands out. It's sort of ugly. And that's an add harmony, because that's the kind of consciousness we've developed. We've separated ourselves from nature, and we feel we stand above nature rather than creating within nature. And that add harmony is, in Christian parlance, called sin, though it's a very harsh word, and harsh not always to effect. Because not all of humanity, not even all of humanity associated with the earth, not to say nothing of the other planets, never fell. They remain pure, and they've been going through a different kind of evolution. And as well, there is no competitive conflict between the children of fire, like there is between the children of fire and water. So whenever there is a spot where there is to be a unity between children of fire and water, there is one of the children of Abel comes to birth, and being a neutral, they are not involved in the competition. They should be accepted by everyone, but they usually get torn apart by everyone. And one of the last instances in history was an individual named Caspar Hauser, who was the last of the Napoleonic line. And the purpose for Caspar Hauser coming to Earth was to unify Europe, because Europe is probably has been the most divided part of the world in terms of language and custom and things like that of any. And so the being was born as Caspar Hauser to be a figure that could be a rallying point that Europe could be unified around. And at I think about age 3, political enemies, took Caspar Hauser and tried to have him killed, as all the brothers were killed, older brothers in the Napoleonic line. But the people who were supposed to kill him couldn't do it, and they put him in a basement. And for 12 years, Caspar Hauser lived in a basement with no education and without even the sense of light. And Caspar Hauser had the intelligence of an able light. Not only when he came out of the cellar could he see stars in the daytime, but he had the perfect memory. Like they could parade 100 people before him, and then parade them all before him again, and he could tell everyone their name and such like that. But eventually, all of the political enemies completely destroyed him. There were several attempts on his life, and the final one was successful. And it's an interesting myth that the person who is neutral could be a unifier between the two sides, but is also hated by both sides because of our negativity. One of the children of Abel is also involved, supposedly, in the mystery of Jesus, but that's much too recondite to go into right now. I'd have to go into all sorts of entailed things. But any time when you find an innocent who is pure and beautiful, that is about to and could bring some unity about, but is blamelessly destroyed, that's usually the myth that can go either way, either a great union or a great destruction. That's usually what a child of Abel is born under. Great, the questions are more fun than the talk. Any more questions? All right. We will talk about the Supreme Being in about 2 weeks. Thank you.